Welcome. Thanks for being here. As I promised, we have Dr. Ed Leshin. He is a holistic chiropractor and also the founder of Personal Energy Training. And he also has a nonprofit called the Healthy Human Project that helps with people who would not typically have access to holistic healthcare. Thank you for being here, Dr. Ed.
Thank you for having me, Michelle.
Hey. So I had a great time. I love reading your newsletters. They are
Thank
so
you.
much, yeah, I learn a lot in them. And you and I connected just through LinkedIn here. So thank you for joining us. And as I go through my death doula training, we have chatted a lot about being a practitioner and helping out others, just kind of deal with the everyday of helping people. And as I read your newsletter, I read you had you you mentioned something about what you went through with your father, and you said sorrow is like a thief of joy, and I just love that. I love that quote. Really stuck with me. So I
Sure.
want to bring you on, and hopefully you can share with us a little bit about your journey and what you went through with your father. So
Yeah.
please let us know what that looked like and what your journey was through grief and how that helped you out.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's just interesting. We all have different paths, and here we are on LinkedIn where, we talk about career and essentials to, little tips and things like that about how we could help each other. And so when we were talking, we were just kind of talking about my journey a little bit. And in the Soulpreneurs newsletter, I wrote that article. And basically, I wanted to just share with people how sometimes we go off on these really interesting journeys and we don't even know how we get there sometimes. But mine started back when I was in chiropractic college, and my dad suddenly passed. He had a dissecting aortic aneurysm. And it was very traumatic. We were with him, and I don't even know how I got through the end of chiropractic college. It was a pretty, when I look back at it, it's like, wow, how did I even do it? But
Yeah, stick to it. You stayed on it.
yeah, but in the time when you're going through something like that, you just do what you do, and the brain adapts, and the mind and the spirit adapts. And so I got through chiropractic college, and then afterwards I started on my journey as a chiropractor. But I'd say about 3 years into it, I just felt this. I don't know how to explain it. Kind of like a searching, an emptiness. It was like something was just. It was a loss, but there was something bigger that was pushing me. And at the same time, I was building my practice, and I was attracting these really interesting cases, a lot of difficult cases. And as the cases were getting harder and harder, I noticed I would, if they came in with a shoulder pain, I'd go home with a shoulder pain. If they came in with a back pain, I'd go home with a back pain. But I'd do some things on myself to help me. And then when they came back in, I would do those things with them, and then they got better. So I started getting kind of a reputation for doing more difficult cases. And I didn't even know anything about trauma transference and all that stuff. But it got to a point where when it started getting with tumors, and then people started coming in with cancers, somehow looking back, I feel like subconsciously I pushed my practice away from me.
Wow.
I talk about that now on my journey here when I'm talking to other practitioners and burnout and things like that, because subconsciously we can do these really interesting things that we're not even aware of at the time, which is sometimes defined as maybe self-sabotage, although that gets kind of a bad rap, because with my story with my dad, it led me to walk away from chiropractic and then go out and do some sales things, which was a really interesting thing. And for those that haven't read my story, it'll take us a long time to probably go through the whole thing. But please go to Soulpreneurs newsletter, and you'll see the full story in there. But that journey just kind of led me into a different place, and all these synchronistic things happen, and it was very spiritual. And that's how you and I got talking about, hey, maybe we could, with your journey and the doula journey, it just seemed like a match that we could talk about it and maybe help people relate to some of these concepts.
Exactly. Yeah. Friday, actually, I'll be talking about more about what you're talking about, which is just kind of looking at the professional aspect and how that affects all the practitioners and nurses and people around end of life, and just what everyone kind of needs to stay focused on for their own self-care, because there's, like you said, there's a lot of burnout, and me entering into deeper aspects of end of life and being with that person at the end. It's very difficult for everyone, for the doctors, for the doulas, for the nurses, and you want to be there for everyone. And what I want to hear more about is your personal energy training, and how that works. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, well, personal energy training is kind of a culmination of all the different experiences that I've had. But in a nutshell, I wanted to be able to develop something where people who are doing sessions, particularly like therapist coaches, one-on-one hour sessions where you're hearing people's stories and things like that, didn't have to hear all the trauma stories and could still do the work and
Right.
help people get past whatever they were trying to get through. It doesn't necessarily just have to be about death and dying, of course. There's so many problems that people experience, but whatever their issues are, there's lots of different traumas that people experience on different levels. And when you're a therapist and you have to sit there all day and listen to all the different stories, you can get overwhelmed. Your subconscious can get overwhelmed, and it starts showing up in little ways. Like you start losing a little empathy, you start dissociating, you get crabby at home, all kinds of
Yeah.
things like that
Yeah.
happen.
And yeah, I mean, the more you see, it's like when I'm with a loved one and, you know, the procedure isn't really going the way you want it to go. And you're sitting there talking to the doctor. Sorry, this camera's like crazy. um, and the poor doctor is like, he's done his best. And because everyone's body is different, maybe procedures don't turn out the way you want them to. And
Yeah,
it's hard. I mean, you could see it on a doctor's face.
sure.
Um,
Yeah,
it's hard to, he has issues. He has a life and
yeah,
difficulties going on in his life, his personal life or physically. And um,
yeah.
yeah, so we have to remember these things.
So personal energy training, people kind of ask me what it is. I say the easiest way I can explain it is it's not hypnosis, because people don't have to go into a trance to experience it. Although we do have them close their eyes in the session because of the brain waves and just getting out of beta brain waves and into alpha brain waves. So they are in a relaxed state. But rather than have to put oneself in kind of a meditation state every day, I like to say it's kind of like meditation with a purpose. It's there is an agenda to the session, and it's led by what the person wants to accomplish or wants to clear out of their, for lack of a better term, their mind field or their energy field. So people come with problems. Usually, I find that whatever they come with, they think the problem is morphs into something else somewhere in the middle of the session. Like somebody might think that it's about chest pain that they have, and then they find out somewhere, get some clarity within the session that it was about something else. A memory comes up about something that happened with a loved one passing, or a loved one doing a certain thing, or just something that is the driving force behind it that they weren't aware of. And so that's the beauty of it. It's a very gentle process, and we don't have to think about a particular trauma, but yet something comes up that kind of reveals to them what is going on behind the scenes. It's like
Right.
getting a backstage pass. That's the only.
Totally. Yeah. And actually, that's what you and I did. Oh, hey, Terry White. Hello. With us today. And
Oh yeah, I think he popped in. Hello, yeah, yeah.
actually, I'm gonna talk with him a little bit in the next week or so. We'll talk about endings. But so when you and I did our session, it was so interesting for me that in our session you pulled out from something that happened or from before I was even born.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that was interesting. So it was like, it was just so funny how working with you, you can really go into deep aspects of what happened or may have happened before to clear things out. And that reminds me of, how can you just help regular people that are not practitioners? How you
Well,
work.
yeah, personal energy training is good for everybody. I just talk about it because I train practitioners. So if they want the training, they usually typically need to experience it first anyway. So most people for me anyway, before they go down a journey of, hey, what is this? They have to experience it because it's like chiropractic. Can you imagine if somebody just says, hey, especially 30 or 40 years ago, just go experience chiropractic. And they're like, what's that?
Right.
Well, they do this thing to your neck where they flip your neck and people are like, what are they doing? And even today, people, because they see stuff in movies, they don't really know what it is until they experience it for the first time. And then
Yeah.
those that experience it, that really enjoy it, they love it and they become like lifelong chiropractic patients. But those who are on the fence and they don't really know, you can't just say, hey, listen, I want you to come to my office and experience, 10 sessions of chiropractic before you even know what it is. You have to have some education, and they usually have to have an experience. And so I had an experience as a young man getting acupuncture by a chiropractor, and that led me into the chiropractic holistic realm, basically. And so I do the same thing with people. There's so many different stressors that people are experiencing these days. The biggest
And they hold
ones
it in their bodies.
are depression and disconnection are the biggest ones right now.
Yeah. And that happens a lot with people that are, again, working with death and dying. And um, because you throw yourself into something, into someone, into their lives, and then they're gone. And that's very, very difficult. And when you're working with family members, that's also a time to help them kind of move forward and make more sense and maybe just go through the grief process
Process the grief.
and
Yeah.
bereavement. Yeah. And so working with personal energy, um, that can really help them kind of.
It's really, I think the way I like to describe personal energy training, and by the way, thank you, Terry. Terry said he's been under chiro. Appreciates that comment because he's been under chiro. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about then.
Yeah.
Personal energy training is kind of a combination of working with the subconscious mind, the conscious mind, and then the higher states of consciousness that we as humans are supposed to activate, right? If we don't activate our higher centers of consciousness and we get trapped into our lower states of consciousness, and we're kind of more into our animalistic self, you would say, or our mammalian self. So when we can access and integrate all three planes, I feel like that's the goal, to really get full breadth of, our working mind, our brain, our body, and then our spiritual self, and integrate them all together. And so that's what personal energy training does. It helps the person access that on their own. And then I teach people how to access that on their own once they learn some of the ins and outs of the system and the modality. But that's the goal, really, is not to make people dependent on me, but to make them more autonomous.
Yes, and more connected. And that's what I find about, that's one of the things that really attracted me to work with people that are at end of life, because sometimes life just keeps us so busy that we get disconnected to who we really are.
Yeah.
And it's in those moments and those times where we come face to face with end of life. And that's the gift that it gives us. It allows us to reconnect. It's an opportunity to reconnect with all parts of our beings, of ourselves, because everything else is just pushed away.
Yeah.
And like your soulpreneur, I mean, it just brings you. It's a time to really try to reconnect with your
own soul. Yeah.
It means something. And
And it's almost like we come here almost with a pre-packaged thing to forget our spiritual self and our soul. And
Yeah.
then we have these experiences, and it is an opportunity, but I don't think we all are educated to the point, or we learn from anybody that it is an opportunity. We just look at it as, well, we look at grief as grief, or emotions, sadness as sadness. And maybe we need to step back a little bit to be able to see that there's other things going on. So back to my dad's story a little bit. So when I left chiropractic and I was doing some sales job, I was working B2B. And then this company that I was working for said, hey, we're opening up a residential division where you'd actually have to go to people's houses and talk to people at their houses. Do you want to do that?
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I just thought it was about the opportunity, doing something different. I said, sure. I was a team player. And so they taught me like what to do and what I was supposed to say to register customers. And I did that. But for me, it wasn't about the job. What wound up happening is I kept running into people with interesting things. I'd run into people with certain healthcare situations, and I didn't have my doctor hat on. So I couldn't say, hey, I'm Dr. Ed Leshin, I could help you. They didn't know who I was. So I would just give them little health tips, and I would share little stories with them about somebody that had something like, I don't know. I remember somebody was talking about they just got a diagnosis of dementia or something like that, or Parkinson's. And I said, hey, I knew somebody that was drinking a lot of diet sodas, and all of a sudden they got these symptoms. And then when they stopped drinking the diet sodas, the symptoms started going away again.
Mm.
And the woman who was in front of me said, my husband drinks tons of diet soda. Thank you so much. I'm really going to talk to him about that. And I just never knew where those little paths were going to lead, but constantly over and over again, I was exposed to people that there was some kind of energetic resonance. I walked in somebody's house once and they had a picture up of a person that looked like my dad. And then they had a picture of somebody that looked like my youngest son at the time. And I said, hey, who are those people on the wall? And she said, oh, that was my husband when he was alive, when he was younger. And that was my son when he was X amount of years old. I don't remember. And I said, well, I have a 6-year-old that looks exactly like my son. Can I take a picture of that? So we compared. I showed her my picture and she let me take a picture. And then I sent it to my ex-wife at the time. And it was like this synchronicity. All these synchronicities were happening and I didn't know why. But a lot of them had to do with airplanes and my dad and just these little stories on this journey. So looking back, I went, wow, it wasn't that I completely sabotaged leaving chiropractic. Almost like it was some kind of spiritual calling for me to go off on that journey and then also get little messages, if you will, from him or from the universe.
Yeah, totally. You just got to leave yourself open to it, and it'll show itself. It'll show itself.
And then years later, I came into, this is the story I shared with you, is that I met somebody, a friend of mine, whose dad was 90-something years old. I think he was 91 years old.
Mm-hmm.
He had dementia for a while, about 7 or 8 years. And he took a fall. And within a couple of days, he was in the hospital. And they said, hey, he's got a dissection going on. What they meant was he had a dissecting aortic aneurysm, which is exactly what my father passed of. So he did pass within the next couple of days because he was 91. There was a do not resuscitate or anything. So they just made him comfortable and he passed. I went with my friend to the hospital to visit. And she was pretty spiritual. And she said her piece and the words that she wanted to say. And then we both put our hands over his heart and we could feel this sort of energy that was still emanating from his heart chakra and his heart field. Mm. And we just looked at each other and our tears were coming down, our eyes. But it was good tears. It was happy tears, like a soul connection. Like we felt we were with him on his transition and his journey, and we had peace with it. And I was able to do something that I wasn't able to do when my dad passed, which was have some kind of closure, because it was very sudden when my dad left. I was younger. I didn't know about all those, the spiritual things and connection. So it was almost like reliving that experience through somebody else, through my friend. and her father, and those kinds of things just kept happening to me, so
Yeah, and that's what's so amazing, that when you understand, and that's why I do this, and you're here with me, because we want to share with people to be present and how to be present, so then they don't miss out on those opportunities. So thank you for bringing that up, and that's wonderful.
yeah.
And talking about that, just how it helped you move through and heal by being able to understand, to be present. How, when we're talking about mental health and stress, how is it that it complements more traditional? So when you put your hands over his heart, and some may say, well, that's kind of a Reiki technique, and
Mhm.
but how does your system help and complement just your typical traditional approaches to handling health and stress? And
Sure. Yeah. Well, first, just to look at that example, we don't do that specifically in the session, although there are contact points. Sometimes I'll have people contact, like put a hand over their heart or put a hand over their head, make a particular contact energetically in their body, because I've also done acupuncture. I've been an acupuncturist, so I just bring that all into a session. But essentially, it's to help people's minds get to a place where they have peace. And so the brain isn't in a dysfunctional pattern anymore. What happens is, when we're stressed, the brain will memorize a stressful pattern, if you will, and then it develops a memory of that. And so then we run off the memories of that. And so I tell people this with chiropractic too. So then when we do the session, the personal energy training, the goal is to help reintegrate everything, so that now the brain is not focused on that or hyper focused on that. It's back to its kind of typical operating state, in a neutral state, and able to move forward and create a new pattern or a new functional pattern, or allow new information in. So it's about getting people back to homeostasis, and it's about getting people back to a functional moment, basically, like in their brains, and also helping the mind to teach the brain how to do that on autopilot, because I'm not going to be there with them all the time. So my goal is not to just, hey, I'm going to do this in the session, but you have to keep coming back to me every time you have a problem. I mean, certainly as practitioners, we want to be able to have a clientele, but it's different. It's more of a guidance, a mentoring, and helping them with the process while they're going through it. So we conduct the session, we're able to use different things like kinesiology and other things to pull information in. And I like to say it's like having conversations with the subconscious. You can have conversations with the subconscious, the conscious, and higher consciousness, which some people call, or I call, like the supra conscious or the soul conscious.
yeah, I mean, we need to be educated, because that's not, when we go to school to learn different trades or professions, we're told to learn things in rote, like just learn the same thing, and you're memorizing, and you're disconnected. And that's something that has been lost, an art that's been lost. So this is a great time. These moments, especially when we're around end of life, it's a great time. Okay, I'm putting down the book knowledge, and I'm getting to know and connect with different parts of myself. And it can just totally, like you said, when you work with someone, you're just like, you're trying to shift that and say, hey, wake up a little bit and listen to yourself. Um, and it can really change your life. And I think some people, sometimes it's scary to intentionally do something where you say, I might change my life. I actually might turn around and say, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. My heart really wants this other part of my life to come alive. Maybe it's a hobby you do or something, but you can ease into things. And I'm a big proponent of change, because it's like the seasons.
Mm-hmm.
You know, winter, spring, fall, and the winter is good because it gives you time to think, and then, but the spring will come, and something, and allow certain things to a seed to crack open so you can have another spring, but that spring will look a little different. And
Yeah.
it made me
Yeah.
think the other day when you were telling me that, like, it's like, we talk a lot about affirmations. Like, affirmations can be great because you're repeating something positive, but also it's a way of ingraining something. But in order to do that, you still need to pop open and crack that seed shell. So I love that you're saying, kind of, let's, in my mind is saying, we're going to crack open a new seed. Like, you have the new seed, you have the seed within you. Crack that shell, that casing, and allow it to grow because it's there within you. And
Yeah, and I'll bring it back to an example because last year I injured my foot. So I use this example, it's a recent example. So I injured my foot, so I started limping. I wasn't putting pressure on that particular foot because it hurt. So I started walking a little bit different. And then that walking a little bit different, then my hips started bothering me. And then my back started bothering me. And so what happens is then the brain memorizes that as normal. It sounds weird to say this, but that dysfunctional pattern, now my brain memorizes, like, okay, this is how he's walking now, because it protects him from pain.
right.
So just on a physical sense, the brain is protecting us from pain by memorizing this new position of walking where I'm like hobbling. And so it thinks that's a good thing. Well, how am I going to get back to walking normal? When I start walking normal, if I have a pain response, I'm going to flash right back into the new memorized pattern because the brain doesn't want to go into pain. So
Right.
with mental health, you asked me, how does this work with people with mental health issues and stuff? They're memorizing the dysfunctional, painful pattern. And when they try to go into the healthy pattern, it's like their brain isn't letting them shift that gear because it remembers that they were in pain when they did that. So it's like, no, you don't want to go back to pain. You don't want to go back to pain. So therefore, we have to teach the brain to release the painful memory first.
Right.
When it releases the painful memory, now it gets back into neutral. Now it's like a stick shift on a car. Now you're in neutral, and now you can, or a motorcycle, or you could shift it into another gear. Now, we're so used to. Here's another analogy: we're so used to driving automatic cars that people don't think about the shifting gears
Totally.
analogy anymore, because the car does it all for you. Well, the brain does it all for you. But if you want to get a manual shifter and experiment with how to do that, that's kind of what we're doing with personal energy training, teaching the brain how to go back to learning how to drive an analogous stick shift. So that
Yeah.
get into neutral and then shift into another gear and learn something new, learn the new pattern again, learn whatever they want to succeed at or attain or whatever. They have to be able to go from this gear to this neutral state to the next gear.
Yeah, it stinks that we don't have it. Like, we have no more standard cars anymore. I mean, most of us, I think, I'm aging myself, but we learned how to drive on a stick shift.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many benefits of it, and that's when
Back in the day.
Wait, we're the same age, right?
Yes.
And it was the cheapest car to get too. So I always liked my little. I used to have I can't remember what kind it was. It was a little red sporty car, and I learned how to ride in the stick shift. But it helped me to learn how to ride a motorcycle because it just came back to me. How do I, what it felt like? I had to listen to the engine.
Yeah, you got to listen to the engine. Yeah.
Yeah.
For the RPMs.
Yeah, to shift. And when
if it was going, that would be okay. I think I got to shift it because it's running a little too high here.
Too high, idling too high. Yeah. And what it also taught me was to stay in gear. So like even on the motorcycle, when you're going around a corner or something, people think, oh, you just kind of fall out of gear when you want to slow down. No. You need to stay in gear. You need to drop your gear before you go around the corner. And then you open it up. You throttle as
You
you
got to get back into the lower
that.
gear, right? Yeah.
Exactly. But the point is, there's an apex, and you always stay engaged in gear. So you really have to pay attention. But if you're driving an automatic car, none of that awareness is going on.
Hey,
And
Lawrence just popped in. Hi, Lawrence.
oh, did it? Hey, Laura.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's say that you had somebody, not you, but anybody has some traumatic experience or memory of something that happened. Okay, the brain memorizes that. Now let's say that's stuck in first gear, and now you're driving along in your life, and you're trying to get like, why can't I get to the higher gears? Why can't I in my business or in my marriage or my relationship or whatever it is? Why can't I get from here to there? Well, because the brain's memorized you're in that gear right now, and it's just focused on that, and it thinks that it's keeping you
Safe.
in the gear that is working,
Yeah.
But we need to teach the brain how to shift the gears. So remember, during the session, I didn't tell you to switch gears. I didn't say, Michelle, you must switch gears. You must do this.
Yeah. You didn't go back to some old trauma.
I have nothing against hypnosis. I love hypnosis, but I, as a practitioner, don't have to tell you to switch gears. What I want to do is help to train your brain through these processes so that it recognizes when it hears the engine going too high, and it knows that it needs to shift on its own. You see?
Right.
You brought up a good example, because when you are tuned into that now, you have a session, and now you know, hey, I have stress. Oh, I'm stuck in this gear. I need to shift. It'll automatically shift for you. Now you turn your manual transmission into an automatic transmission by doing the conditioning.
Right. And that's where the whole, when you're a doctor or a nurse or, with end of life or any, profession, I think a lot of people working with people, sometimes something comes up for you, and you, like you brought up, to handle your stress, it's not good to just turn off your emotions. So
it's stuck in gear.
It's stuck in gear, right? So when you feel like something's off, like you hear that grind, that gear is just, the RPMs are way too high, you can say, wait a minute, I'm triggered. There's something going on with me. I need to move, take a step back and take a look at it. So it's important to recognize when you're having an emotion that you need to handle outside and not just freeze and get stuck in the gear.
Yeah. So during the process, we just asked the person's higher consciousness levels to actually step in and kind of do some of the intervention and do some of the training. So that's why it's called personal energy training, because it's personal for the person. Like, I don't know what they need to be trained on. I don't know, I don't know what gears they need to shift specifically. But when they come to a session, if you remember when you came to this session, I asked you to tell your story or anything that was really like a deep story.
Yeah, like I went through when I had my children abducted, and
you didn't have to tell that story in the session.
I didn't have to tell any of that. Right.
So that's how it can integrate with other therapists that see that by doing sessions with people every day where they're hearing trauma stories over and over and over again, and by the end of the day they're kind of like, oh my God.
Yeah, it just sucks all your energy out of you. Yeah.
Or people that are exposed to end of life, and they see another person pass, and they're starting to get overwhelmed and they're stuck in a gear. It helps them to transition without having to think about the specifics of what's involved in that. So they don't have to think about every story that they heard or whatever. So a therapist,
just repeating it, right?
Who might want to learn this might say, yeah, this would be a cool tool to have. I can do my talk stuff, but I don't have to have the person get deep into the woods in a session with every detail about the abduction or whatever happened. They could just tell me, I had this thing that happened and it was really bad. And okay, I'm thinking about it right now. Okay, that's all you need to do. Now let's go through this process and let's recondition the mind and the brain to work together on the same team so that they can help you shift into a different gear. That's really what it's all about.
Yeah, and it works so well with like just looking at the whole legacy planning and pre-planning. And I always say if someone, me or someone you work with can help you look at what you want end of life to look like, and help you kind of reconfigure the story that you tell yourself, or an experience that happened to you, you can start to, the earlier you start to look at that, the better. But I'm trying to help people kind of shift gears and come up and think of a new way of looking at things. And sometimes it's much deeper. And that's what you bring to the table, Dr. Ez. You can say, I can go much deeper and help you, before, during, or after,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of make that shift. Because
Yeah.
it's important, even when you're looking at grief, to honor what you're going through, but it's important also to recognize when you're stuck in a gear and to take action. And that's where you need to make the decision to step up and help yourself, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a great book. I'm going to give a plug for a book. It's called The Spiritual Brain. And in The Spiritual Brain, they actually, the author did some, he was a neuroscientist, and he did some experiments with nuns up in Canada about spirituality and what parts of the brain would be activated. But what he did do in the book that was so great was lay out really why people are so afraid of death and dying, because it's been drilled into people that we are just these sort of like machines, and when we're done, the machine is turned off. And there's not this sense of our consciousness goes on because of all that programming. It's called materialism. It's a philosophy of materialism. He really dissects materialism very well. And so I'm happy to give a plug for the book, because I think it was a fascinating read about what has happened to us on the human journey and why we're so afraid of end of life, and that we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to plan, as you say, or whatever, many times. And sometimes you can't plan. I mean, I had a friend,
Totally.
a septic friend that passed earlier in the year. I made a post about, and it was sudden. He didn't expect it. My uncle, when he was in his 40s, died in a car accident. It was unexpected. He didn't plan it. It's when it happens, we never know when it's going to happen. But it just seems like being afraid of it is not the answer either.
Exactly. Yeah. There's so many unknowns, and life. I said life is one of those things. It's kind of like on vacation. You make the plan to get there. You don't know exactly everything that's going to happen, but you got to make a little allowance for how you're coming back home.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I used to, when I was a financial advisor, I'd help people on planning on the what ifs. Like, okay, yeah, we can talk about saving money and compounding money and your retirement benefits, but the part you got to remember is to make sure you have, some piece of life insurance, disability, and long-term care. Like long-term care, what about long-term care at 28 years old? Who buys long-term care at 28?
Yeah.
But when it's about those surprise times, I was like, I don't want my kids to have to, if I get in a car accident or something, I don't want them to have to, clean me, change me, whatever. So I was like, I'm just going to do this because, yeah, it's not cheap, but I'll have less vacation, but make sure I plan for, have something in place for if something happens.
Well, I think, language is very fascinating to me. And I think in your field, if you mention death, it scares people. So it's just like mentioning contracts scare people. When I was in sales, if you mention a contract to somebody, they're like, their mind just completely shut down, and they run the other way. So, back in the day, people started talking about agreements, the word agreements. The mind can handle the word agreements, but it couldn't handle the word contract because it just seemed so definite, and imposing and everything. So how language affects the brain has always been really fascinating to me. So I don't know if there's something else that you could call it instead of end of life or death planning, maybe spiritual planning, or spiritual consciousness planning or something. I don't know. I wonder what the terminology is that people would feel more comfortable with. And there has to be something that they would feel more comfortable with. Maybe like spiritual planning.
I don't know. I think one of my first bumper stickers was "Life's a bitch and then you die."
Yeah,
that's my first bumper sticker when people used to have bumper stickers. So I was like, whatever.
For a lot of people, that's just too much for them to handle, right? So
well, yeah, I think it's a matter of control. Like, I don't look to control stuff. Like, I'll do the adulting, and I would make sure everything was in place. But then the reward was for having things in place was, well, then I have the freedom to have fun.
Yeah.
I took care of what I needed to for my two girls, and then I was, no one could say I was a bad mom because I didn't take care of whatever I needed to. My kids, were okay, and they could come by, bring me, the mail or a beer if I was in the hospital or whatever. I took care of it, so until to this day. So I want more freedom.
Everybody, that's why I do congruency also with people, because for everybody, they're congruent with different words and different experiences. So finding out what somebody's congruent or not congruent with is a big help in developing a language that is more palatable for somebody, because if somebody has a belief against a certain word, they're not going to listen to anything somebody says, whether it's a salesperson or a owner or a dad or a mom or a dad or whatever. They're just like tune out. So that's, I think somebody mentioned it earlier. Lawrence mentioned neurolinguistics. Yeah, I mean, language, however we want to call it, and learning what the person's language is and what's important to them is so key. And I really work with people on that when I do sessions to help them.
Yeah. Terry mentioned CBT.
Cognitive behavioral therapy. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So working with the conscious mind is important. And I like to say, just some kind of summarizing things, that there's so many good techniques and processes out there. And I see the marketers are really, the nature of marketing is to say mine's better than yours kind of a thing. And to me, that's not in the consciousness. That's not congruent with me, because that's not in the consciousness state that I want to be in. Yeah. So rather than say like, hey, personal energy training is better than all this stuff, what I say is, there is a place for talk therapy. There is a place for subconscious work. There is a place for highest consciousness work. And what if you can just go to a playground where everybody can play in that playground and choose which ones of those they want to use, and instead of saying, like talk there. I hear so many marketing things these days of like, oh, talk therapy is so bad and stuff. And that's not true. It's just that there may be another ingredient that somebody needs to put into the mix when they're going through, when they're stuck in first gear and they can't get out of first gear. Maybe talking about it is not going to get them out of first gear, but that doesn't mean that the talking necessarily is bad. It's just, there's different ways to talk to people. And in my sessions, I talk to people. You did a session with me, so we it's called check-in. So go through this process, and then we check in, and then ask a person, what they're experiencing, what's coming up for them, and then just minorly talk about that a little bit without having to go into any trauma.
Yeah, that's what we did. You just did a check-in with me, and you were like, how is this? How is that? And then we just went back in and dove in a little deeper, a little different shift. And it was great. It was great. I didn't need to go into repeating whatever had happened. Like for me, in my case, it was the, domestic violence and having my children taken from me. I didn't have to get into that. But it helped to be able to shift. Like I wasn't stuck there.
Mm-hmm. But let's say as a chiropractor or acupuncturist practitioner, I'm in an office and I have clients coming to see me every day, and I was not doing the personal energy training, but let's say I was just doing acupuncture. And every person that came in, I told the story about how sad I was initially when my dad passed away. I would be reinforcing it over and over again in my mind. Like I would be stuck in that gear, so to speak,
Exactly.
of, oh my God, he passed away, and and this is why, and I would be reinforcing that. But if it was something that was a lesson that I could share with somebody, and I could bring that up every once in a while, then it's not a bad thing. And that's how you could use conscious, talking and communication.
Yeah.
For positive sake, I guess.
Grief and sorrow is a normal emotion and thing to go through. And
Terry says therapy isn't not necessarily a one size fits all.
Yeah,
absolutely,
totally.
absolutely.
Yeah, and that's what's great is that you have so many different tools in your toolbox, and even me, in the end of life arena. It's funny because there's I heard there is a death doula training, and this person says, "Oh, you need to get your death doula training from a nurse." I'm like, "Why are you saying that? Like, you don't have to get training. You don't have to be trained as a death doula from a nurse. It doesn't mean it's more valuable because there's so many different aspects to it. And sorry, but a nurse's job is a nurse's job who's involved in hospice or whatever. Like they've got that. They're doing that. Like as a doula, you are honoring all the different professionals, the medical professionals, what they say goes. Like so.
Well, that's just marketing.
Exactly.
The marketers. I call it the marketers. The marketers kind of really want people to focus on a certain aspect
totally.
Of things because they also know human behavior, and they know that people respond to pain and tribal inclusion. So all these things are used in marketing to get people to make decisions. And I like to say, come and experience my work so that you can make a decision on your own and not have to be marketed to.
Yeah, see if it's a fit. Like everyone's different. Like
experience it. Like I experienced chiropractic and acupuncture when I was 15 years old. That's how I knew it was a cool thing. And I experienced kinesiology. I was like, wow, he could show me that if I hold milk, the milk made my muscle weak, so I stopped drinking milk, and then all my acne went away when I was 15 years old. And I went, this is pretty cool. Like I experienced that. So I don't need any science to tell me anything about it. I don't need anybody else to tell me anything about it. I experienced that was true for me and continues to be true for me to this day.
Yeah.
Being able to use kinesiology in really wonderful ways. So I'm a big believer in experiential stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's what life shows you and what you're willing to experience. But I'm more, I'm not a controller. Like that's not my MO. I'm more about freedom. And I want the freedom to experience all the different aspects of life. And so I'm willing to have different experiences. I'm willing for life to kind of shift me in a new direction. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do something new. Otherwise, I could have gotten repeated that whole, my experience. I remember the experience that I had of abuse and everything that happened with my girls when they were little. And some people would say, well, I've had people say, why aren't you an alcoholic? I'm like, because I didn't get stuck in a gear.
Yeah, you shifted.
I shifted. I didn't get stuck in a gear. I didn't repeat and say, well, I can't get out of this. I'm like, no. I'm like, okay, I'm turning a different corner. What's up ahead? And I just kind of open it up into it. I don't try to control it. And that's, again, back to the end of life. It's something that none of us really know what to experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so how I look at it is I'm like, dude, this view, this horizon just opened up. And so we just want to help people to kind of
get into neutral, to get peace. Yeah.
Like
the wonderful things can happen when you're able to be in neutral and then find another gear. Like I did a session on a gentleman. This was a couple of years ago now, and I remember it specifically because we did the session. It was all about him wanting to find a new job. So he was trying to find a better job. He was in the mental health space, but he wanted to find a good job, and that was the whole emphasis of why he came to the session. So there wasn't really like a drama story or anything like that that he presented with. So I went through, we did the process, and then about halfway through the session, he came to some realizations about some stuff in childhood on his own that just were kind of flowing through when he wasn't stuck in the memory gear of, I can't find a job and all this other stuff. And then about 4 months later, I heard back from him. He went a while before I heard back from him. And when he came back from the session, I said, so what's new in your life? And he said, well, after the session, I found a job within 2 weeks. Then I got promoted very, very quickly after that. And within a month, got a call from an estranged family member. He said when he was younger, he had a baby with a woman and the relationship didn't work out. And because of some tensions and things, he wasn't able to stay in contact with his then 2-year-old son. So he had lost contact. And all of a sudden, within a month after getting back in, so I don't like to frame it as the session did it. He got back into neutral. He got into the place where he could see an opportunity for something else, and then his mind was able to manifest that and bring good things to him. His son called him out of the blue and said, "Hey, Dad, I'm getting married. I want to reconnect with you." How does that happen? We are connected to a morphic field. That's how it happens. And when we're able to connect to the field instead of just connecting to our own pain, then we can do
controlling it. We're trying to control everything.
That happened with me with my father after he passed. I was just floating around in the field and running into people who had planes. And I ran into somebody who had a picture of a plane that he talked about right before he passed away. So it was one of the last planes that he talked about. And then I walk into somebody's house and they have a picture of that plane on the wall. And just things like that just kept happening, Whoa, this is really cool.
Cool. But you noticed it. That's the key thing.
I noticed it, but I think my brain was open to receiving it as well, too.
Totally. So when we look at when people would meet with you, are you kind of, how do you handle the sessions? And what's the best way to have a session with you?
Well, the sessions are usually they're an hour to 90 minutes. The first one is usually about 90 minutes. Sometimes I've gone longer and sometimes I've gone shorter. Usually follow-up sessions can be shorter sometimes because the brain has already gotten trained now into reconsolidating and kind of going through the process on its own, getting back into neutral, I guess, if you will.
And you said there were 2 different types of trainings that you do. You do individuals, and then you do.
Session. Yeah. So one of it is training for practitioners. So tell
me more about that.
Okay, so I'm helping practitioners that want to up-level their skills. So just like any practitioner might say, I want to learn hypnosis, or I want to learn EMDR, or I want to learn this modality or that modality. Practitioners by nature like to learn cool things to help their patients out, right?
Different tools in the toolbox. Love it.
Yeah. So this is another avenue that they could pursue, and I welcome them to have a sampling of that and experience that, group sessions or one-on-ones for those. And then the other is just for individuals who want to learn how this work can help them. If they have a particular challenge, let's say you're listening to this out there and you have some kind of pattern in your life that keeps repeating itself and you don't know why, or you can't break through to the next level of something, and you don't know why, then this work is a great exploration to recalibrate the brain and the mind with the field that we interact with our spiritual side, our soul, and also with our subconscious. So it's not just subconscious training work. That's only one-dimensional. It's kind of multi-dimensional. I look at it as almost like Chinese medicine, 4 or 5 parts integrating together. So we look at how all those parts integrate with each other, and I call those the elements. So there could be one element out of balance, or there could be 4 or 5 elements out of balance. I don't know until we start the session. So people a lot of it's been mouth because it's hard to explain something that's conceptual until people experience it. So I could just say, if you have a challenge and you've tried different things and it's not exactly getting you to where you want to go, then I would encourage you to try this and see for yourself if it helps you in some way.
Yeah. And I mean, I'll use myself as an example. For me, it's because, well, I gave notice at my regular 9 to 5 job and I quit. I'm jumping off the ledge here, and my last day is next week, the end of the month.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So I was like, Dr. Ed, I'm kind of nervous. Now I have to, starting, next month, whatever, I have to start to apply to do more of the teachings that I'm doing on end of life and pitch to event planners and local groups to do to hire me to do paid workshops and speaking. So I'm a little nervous about that. I mean, doing my volunteer work, I love. That's easy, for hospice.
Are you still nervous about that, or were you nervous?
No, I'm much better. That's why I was like, well, I'm kind of nervous now. I have to put on my big girl panties and, just apply to this stuff. And I'm just so used to doing part of this, just helping people. But if I need more time to actually help more people, like in the workplace or things, and I'm shy. And so working with you, I just felt much more relaxed about it. So thank you. That was
You're really welcome.
Yeah, and I'll definitely do a check-in too.
Awesome.
Right? So I just want to.
That's the goal, just to get people in a more peaceful place with themselves.
Yeah,
so
I mean, life's full of challenges, but
in touch with themselves.
Yeah. So thank you. We have thanks for
sharing
information here, how people can contact you.
Absolutely. Yeah, feel free to go to the website, look around. There's a few stories on there. And then also there's a link in my bio where you can just schedule some time, like a 15-minute talk, and we'll chat.
Nice. Well, I will see you on social. And you are physically, you are located in Arizona, right?
I'm in Arizona, yes. And thank you everybody who showed up and participated.
Yeah, Terry and Lawrence. Yeah, Terry is a voiceover artist.
Nice.
Yeah, so we're gonna have a chat. He has an awesome podcast. It's called Weiss Thoughts. It's really good, and we are going to have a chat about ending. So awesome. Terry's going to join me to do that.
Terry, all right, look forward to it. Yes,
great.
Michelle, thank you so much for the talk and this discussion.
This is fun. Great seeing you.
I hope many opportunities to come for both.
Thanks. Keep your fingers crossed. All right, it'll be a fun ride no matter what. All right. Take care.
Everybody. Okay. Bye-bye.